At the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses gathers all the people to give his final words before going off to die, and the people go off to enter into the promised land. And what he does is give them a review of all the precepts of the law that God has called them to live as his holy people, but also to remember God's goodness to them in freeing them from slavery in Egypt and forming them in the desert. And he tells them in observing this law, I teach you the statutes and decrees as the Lord my God commanded me, that you may observe them in the land you are entering to occupy. Observe them carefully, for thus will you give evidence of your wisdom and intelligence to the nations, who will hear of all these statutes and say, this great nation is truly a wise, intelligent people. For what great nation is there that has God so close to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him? Now, when we think of the Catholic faith or the Christian faith, many people will often think of a great many rules. And let's face it, in the book of Deuteronomy and the law of Moses, we see a great many rules. But what Moses calls the people to is to exercise a wisdom that will be manifest to the nations, because these aren't just simply rules and regulations, but words given to us by God to be the people he needs to form us to be. When Jesus came, he says in the gospel, do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Amen, I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or the smallest part of a letter will pass from the law until all things have taken place. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever obeys and teaches these commandments will be called greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Why? Because we manifest that wisdom of a people called by God, of a people who have a close relationship with God. And so, yes, there are a great many rules that we must follow. And that's reflected in the season of Lent, in which we have rules that we follow, practices that we observe, exercises in living that faith that help us to grow and strengthen our spiritual disposition as people who are followers of Christ. And if we can't follow the simple rules and practices during the season of Lent, how much less can we live those standards of our faith throughout the course of the year? Because in the end, what we live are not simply rules to be followed, but standards to be lived as people made in God's image and likeness, and in particular as a people called to manifest and bear forth and bear witness to that gospel that Jesus has given us. So we are not people who simply follow rules, but we live those standards to which we are called. And in doing so, as Moses says in the book of Deuteronomy, we will manifest a wisdom to the nations that we have a relationship with a God who is very, very close to us. And we don't find loopholes around those standards, but rather we live those standards substantially and honestly because we want to maintain that relationship with God and with one another as his people. So let us continue as we approach the halfway mark of the season of Lent to maintain our practices during this season with always an eye to live those standards of our faith honestly and substantially throughout the course of the entire year. And in so doing, we will manifest that wisdom and that relationship we share with a God who is close to us.